What if I told you that waking up at 4 a.m. wasn't the hardest part of a peasant's life in medieval France? What if I told you the real horror came after the sun rose? That they pulled plows with their own bodies because the oxen had been eaten last winter. That people didn't dream of riches or love or salvation, but of death. Stay with me, because for the next few minutes, you're going to live one full day as a 14th century peasant, and by the end, you'll understand why they prayed not for bread, but for the grave. Welcome back, seekers of forgotten history. If you're new, here subscribe, because we don't tell the same stories textbooks do. And if you've ever wondered what it really felt like to live without power, comfort, or hope, this story is for you. Let's begin where every peasant's day did, in the cold and in pain. Pierre didn't wake up. He surfaced from pain, from cold, from a night of breathing air so stale it felt like chewing dust. He hadn't dreamt not in years. Peasants didn't have the luxury of dreams, only hunger and pain, and the occasional memory of someone who had died more quietly than most. His back screamed before his eyes opened. His stomach had long since given up on complaints. His mouth tasted of metal and ash. Outside, roosters screamed like they were being strangled. And the mud floor beneath him wasn't wet from rain. It was urine. Maybe his own. He pushed himself up, slowly, so as not to black out. The rush of blood to his head was dizzying. He looked to the others, his cousins, maybe, or just other survivors, all bone and cloth and skin like rope. Someone's foot was black from frostbite. Another girl's eye was sealed shut from an untreated infection. No one asked if she could still see. No one asked anything. Questions cost time. Time cost energy. The only thing worse than a lazy man was a dying one, because the ladder still had to be carried. There was no breakfast. There hadn't been for 2 weeks. If you were lucky, someone handed you a piece of turnip or a strip of bark to suck on. Pierre stepped into his shoesif. They could be called that. Leather once. Now more hole than shoe. His toes peeked out like worms. The earth outside was cold and slick with last night's frost. The fields waited like a hungry god, yawning wide. And there, beside the fence, was the yoken, actual wooden plow yoke, made for oxen, now fitted for men. They would drag it themselves, again, like beasts. By midday, Pierre could no longer feel his fingers. They'd gone numb after the 3rd hour. His shoulders burned. Ow. His knees clicked with every step. And still, the foreman shouted, "Faster." Not that anyone ever went faster, but the threat of the whip made the illusion feel real. Behind him, a boy, maybe 14, fell, just dropped face first into the mud. The plow didn't stop. No scream, just a muffled sound. When they unhooked the straps, the boy was dead or gone, or free, depending how you looked at it. Nobody cried. Crying was a waste of salt. They dragged the boy to the side of the field and left him near the ditch. The foreman made a mark in a notebook. Not a name, just a number. Peasant death. Number 32 this season. We'll bury him after frost. That meant he'd lie there until his body froze stiff and the crows had done their work. And if spring came late, well, he'd just return to the soil like everything else. That was the cycle. Seed, sweat, bone, ash, seed again. The church said it was holy. Pierre had stopped believing. By dusk, the wind was slicing through their tunics. Pierre's legs cramped every few steps. He wanted to sit, but sitting meant not standing, and not standing meant the whip. One man once chose to lie down mid-row. They didn't beat him. They just stepped over him and let the yoke drag across his chest. His ribs cracked audibly. No one turned. By the time someone came back for the body, wolves had already found it. That man had once had a wife. She remarried a week later. Life didn't stop, just the people in it. At night, Pierre didn't sleep, not truly. He just existed with his eyes closed. The louse in his shirt kept biting. His belly twisted in knots. Somewhere in the dark, someone was moaning softly, either from fever or madness. They were the same thing here. Death wasn't scary anymore. It was a shape you saw out of the corner of your eye every day. Familiar, like a cousin you didn't like. People said the priests could stop it, but the priest only came once a month, and he brought tax collectors, not salvation. He wore silk, and his fingers were soft. The next morning, someone hung themselves. A woman, mid-30s, not young, not old. She'd lost her baby 2 weeks, or rats, or both. She hadn't spoken since. They found her in the barn, rope around her neck, feet brushing the dirt. The foreman cut her down and spit. Selfish. That was all, he said. They took her body to the woods. Burials were for the obedient. Suicide was sin. And sin went to rot. But Pierre watched her face before they dragged her away. She looked calm, almost asleep, like she'd remembered something everyone else forgot. There was a boy named Julian, small and sickly, who never stopped humming. He worked like the rest, but always with this strange little tune under his breath, tuneless and eerie. One day, the overseer told him to stop. He didn't. That night, they found Julian half buried under manure. His hands were broken. He was still humming. Pierre asked him why, and Julian whispered because it makes the shadows stay back. After that, Pierre started humming too, quietly, just in case. He didn't believe in magic. But when you live like an animal, you try anything that feels human. Time blurred. Days became rows. Rows became seasons. Pierre didn't know what year it was, or how old he was. They didn't use calendars. They measured time by harvests, by plagues, by mass burials. There had been 3 bad winters, 2 famines, 1 burning when the manor accused villagers of hoarding grain and set fire to 6 homes. That was when half the children went missing. Some said they ran. Some said they were taken. Nobody knew. The priest called it God's trial. Pierre called it Tuesday. One night, Pierre sat outside alone. The sky was clean. Cold stars overhead like nail heads in black leather. He closed his eyes and asked not for food, not for warmth, not for mercy. He asked to disappear. Just not be. No pain. No dirt. No dragging. No pulling. Just a moment without weight. And in that moment, for the first time in years, he saw his mother's face. He didn't remember her name, just her hands, and the way she used to hum before her teeth fell out, before her skin went gray, before she stopped getting up. He opened his eyes. The stars were still there. The pain was still there. But something else was too. A thought, a dream, or maybe a decision. The next morning, he did not report to the fields. He walked past the church, past the yoke, into the woods, and did not come back. The first thing Pierre noticed in the woods was how silent it was. Not peaceful, just empty. Like the trees themselves were holding their breath. The wind didn't whistle. The birds didn't sing. Even the ground seemed reluctant to carry his footsteps. He didn't know where he was going. No one ever left the village. Those who tried were either caught, starved, or never seen again. But he wasn't running. Not really. He was just walking. And every step away from the plow felt like stepping out of his own skin, like dying in reverse. His stomach screamed by midday. He hadn't eaten in over 3 days. He chewed on pine needles, then bitter bark, then gave up. He found a stream, a thin trickle of water over rocks and mudland, drank until his belly ached. The water smelled like copper. He didn't care. Hunger made you ignore things. Hunger turned your brain into an animal's. He thought about turning back once, just once. Then remembered the boy who fell face first in the mud, and the woman swinging from the barn beam, and the silence that came after. No, he wouldn't go back. The woods thickened. Brambles tore his sleeves. Twigs snapped beneath his bleeding feet. Every now and then, he thought he saw something, a flash of cloth, the curve of a shoulder behind a tree, but when he turned, there was nothing. Hunger was playing tricks, or ghosts were watching. Either way, he kept going. That night, he slept under a fallen log, curled tight, shaking with cold. He dreamed of bread, not hot, soft bread, but old crusts, black, moldy, hard enough to chip teeth. And in the dream, he still ate it, still wept with joy. The second day, he found a fence, not a big one, just old wood slats nailed between trees. But it was a sign. Civilization, or danger, or both. He followed it, cautiously, heart pounding. Beyond the fence, smoke. Then voices, real voices. Not angry shouting, not threats, just people talking. He crept closer, crouched behind a bush. A garden lush and green, overflowing with cabbage, squash, even tomatoes. A pig in a pen. Chickens wandering freely. A woman middle-aged, barefoot, was laughing as she fed a goat. Pierre blinked. This wasn't a manor. This wasn't the church. This was something else, something hidden. He watched until dusk. Then hunger overcame fear. He stepped forward, slowly, hands raised, mouth too dry to speak. The woman saw him. She didn't scream, just tilted her head. Then she said something that made his knees buckle. "You're the 6th this month." They took him in, fed him broth, so thin it was almost clear, but it was warm and didn't taste like dirt. He ate with his fingers, like a starving dog. No one judged. There were others. A boy with a missing ear. A girl whose eyes never looked straight ahead. An old man who didn't speak, but carved shapes into wood with trembling hands. They called the place La, which meant the drowned. Not a village, not a commune. Just a patch of land nobody claimed, filled with people who had chosen not to die where they were born. At night, Pierre asked why no one had ever spoken of this place. Why the church, the lords, the taxman hadn't crushed it. The woman, her name was Sabine, just smiled. They don't look for people who are already dead. Pierre stayed. Days passed. He mended fences, dug soil that was soft, planted onions, learned how to trap rabbits with loops of twine. The pain in his body faded slowly. The pain in his head, Kina, not as fast. He flinched at shadows. He waited for the whip that never came. He slept lightly, always listening, always expecting to be dragged back. But no one came. The outside world forgot him. And forgetting, in this time, was freedom. But freedom comes with a cost. One morning, smoke rose in the north. Black smoke from the fields he had fled. Sabine sent scouts. They returned, quiet. The village was gone, burned, bodies in rows. Some tied together, others half buried. The priest, they said, had called it a cleansing. A lord had accused the peasants of sabotage, blaming poor crops on laziness. The punishment was fire. Pierre said nothing, but that night he walked alone into the woods, knees in mud, face to the sky, and wept, not for the village, not for the dead, but for the truth. They would have done anything to escape, and still they died dreaming of it. Sabine found him at dawn. Her voice was calm. "You're one of us now. You don't owe them anything." But he did. He owed them a memory, a name, a story. He began to write not on parchment, but wood, bark, carved with nails and bone. Every name he remembered, every face, every horror, not to preserve, but to bury. So the earth would carry their names, even if the sky forgot. Years passed, he grew strong. His hands grew thick. He taught others how to endure pain, how to fake obedience until they could flee. He carved maps in stone, planted trees along hidden trails. He became the ghost he once feared. And when he died many winters later, under the roots of an old elm tree, they didn't bury him. They planted seeds where he lay. And in spring, cabbages bloomed from the soil that once tasted blood. Spring came late that year. Frost clung to the treetops like mold, and the wind carried the scent of rot, even in daylight. The people of La didn't complain. They planted anyway. They knew better than to expect kindness from the sky. Each seed placed into the thawing earth was a gamble against silence. And yet, something strange happened. Where Pierre had been buried under the crooked elm at the clearing's edge, the ground was warmer. Not just softer, warmer. First to sprout, first to bloom. The others said nothing. But when they passed the elm, they bowed their heads. The stories of Pierre spread in hushed whispers, not out of reverence, but out of necessity. His life had become a lesson, not how to live, but how to disappear. Young ones were taught his paths, where the moss faced east, how to walk without snapping twigs, where to drink without being seen. He became legend the way famine becomes legend, not through poetry, but survival. The people didn't build a monument. They built exits, rooted paths that led quietly into other woods, other shelters, other lives. Sabine called them the threads. Because when the world tries to unravel you, she said, you have to weave elsewhere. One thread led east, into the lowlands, where water was poison and the mud could swallow a man whole. But some made it. That one was the most dangerous, and therefore the most sacred, because beyond it, hidden deep in shadow, was a sanctuary, not a place of worship, a place of refusal. There, in the remnants of an abandoned abbey, the broken had built something the outside world couldn't name. No plows, no taxes, no sermons, only rules. No violence, no masters, no masters, no prayers for mercy. Pierre had never seen it, but those he trained had, and every time someone returned from that northern thread, they carved another notch into the old elm. By the 10th year, it looked less like a tree and more like a totem of scars. But peace never lasts long. In the summer of the 13th year, something changed. A boy arrived at Lay, barely 10, skin pale, eyes too blue. He wore no shoes, but his cloak was of fine cloth, stitched in places where peasants would patch with twine. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just collapsed in the cabbage row, arms curled under his chest like he'd been taught to die quietly. When Sabine lifted him, he flinched. Not from fear, from habit, like a dog that had never been pet. They fed him, let him sleep, waited. On the 3rd day, he spoke just one sentence. They're looking for me. That night, smoke bloomed in the sky to the west. Not like village, smoke thin, steady, from wood and thatch. This was tar, wet, black, rolling. The scouts didn't return. 3 days later, the soldiers arrived. Not knights, not tacksmen, mercenaries. Foreign armor, stripped of insignia, faces covered in veils of chain. Their leader wore no helmet, only a single iron ring around his neck. The villagers didn't run. They'd done nothing wrong. They didn't hide. They had nothing worth stealing. They stood in rows, hands open, as if to say, "We have only dirt." But that wasn't what the soldiers came for. They came for the boy, the one with blue eyes. Pierre would have known what to do. Sabine tried. She stood between the mercenaries and the garden gate, said, "He's not here." Said, "He's just a child." Said, "You'll find nothing here but mud." The man with the iron ring said nothing, just raised one finger. They took her first. The rest they left alive, perhaps as a message, perhaps as bait. The boy was gone by then. Someone had led him to a thread. No one admitted who. In La, silence was the deepest form of loyalty. But everyone knew the price. After the mercenaries left, the villagers gathered at the elm. For the first time in years, they prayed, not to God, to Pierre. What now? The answer didn't come in words. It came in fire. They burned their own homes. They salted the gardens. They slaughtered the animals and buried them deep. Love would not be taken. It would vanish. The survivors scattered into the threads. Some were hunted. Some vanished. Some those who knew how to become missurvived. They told the story to others, planted it like seeds. There was a place once, not ruled by kings, not watched by priests, where death was not a curse but a choice. The boy with the blue eyes would be seen again, though never in the same place, and never for long. Some said he grew into a ghost, others that he was a trap bait sent by lords to lure the disobedient into light. But those who had seen him up close knew there was no deceit in him, only weight, the kind of weight a child should not carry, one who had known cages, known how silence protects. He didn't speak of what he ran from, but in the northern thread, far beyond marsh and wolves, a new tree bore carvings with his name. They called him Lord Felon, the orphan, but not because he had no parents, because he belonged to no world, not the peasants, not the lords, not even the ghosts. And wherever he passed, people began planting, not out of hope, but as a dare against the dirt. They dug shallow, quick rows, dropped seeds wrapped in ash, and prayed not with their mouths but their hands. Silent gestures passed from one scarred palm to another, symbols that meant, don't stop, they're watching, keep going, there's still time. By the time winter returned, La was a memory. But the threads multiplied, tiny pockets of people, farmers, fugitives, mothers who'd buried too many children, moved through the woods like rumors. They never stayed long, never built walls, never trusted maps, but they listened for signs, twisted branches in the shape of arrows, stones stacked in threes, cloth tied to birch bark in red knots. The old code. What began with peer had become language, a vocabulary of survival, and across what was once the kingdom's belly, a quiet infection took root. People who no longer feared hunger, only capture. Back in the manors, whispers grew. Lords began posting riders. Preachers blamed the crops. The land rots because you withhold your labor, they shouted. Return to your plows, or you shall not enter heaven. But fewer showed up each year. Some fled, some hid, others stayed. Yes, but only to open the gates at night and let others out. The fear of death had lost its grip, because they had found something worse than dying, surviving for nothing. In one remote hill settlement, a priest was found hanging in his own bell tower. Beneath his feet, scratched into the floorboards, were the words, "He forgives no one, I do." Nearby, in the church garden, were rows of onions no one had planted. They'd grown on their own. And people began to say, the soil remembers. Not long after, mercenaries were ordered to patrol the forests. They burned what they found. Slaughtered animals, uprooted gardens. But the threads were no longer single lines. They had braided, twisted, doubled back through stone and river and smoke. Soldiers died in those woods, starved, lost, or pierced by hands that struck only once, then disappeared. No armies came to look for them. The king had wars to fight elsewhere. The church had relics to guard, and the nobles had too many graves to dig. Then, one night, a woman returned to a ruin once called La. She brought no tools, no seed, just her body, her memories, and a small pouch of ash. She stood at the base of the elm, now hollow from lightning, and pressed her hand to its broken bark. She whispered, "This is for them," then knelt, dug into the earth, and buried her pouch. Around her, others emerged from shadow, silent. No one spoke names. Names were dangerous. But one child asked, "Is this where the first man lived?" The woman shook her head, then smiled. "No, this is where the first man stopped running. By spring, vegetables returned to that place, not in rows, not in order, but wild, strong, like they belonged." The woman grew old beneath that elm, taught no sermons, wrote no books, but her hands told stories, and her silence drew people like firelight. They called her La Racinda Root, and when she passed, they did not bury her. They burned her with herbs, fed her ash to the river, and placed a single cabbage leaf on the stone where she last slept. Generations passed, kingdoms fell, borders shifted, plows rusted, cathedrals crumbled, but the threads never died. They became trees, they became roads, they became us, and somewhere beneath everything you can still hear them.